All right, so today we're going deep on these high-stakes peace talks happening right now.
Mhm.
And, on the surface, it's all very hush-hush, very quiet in this fancy Riyadh hotel.
Right.
But behind the scenes, you've got American, Russian, Ukrainian delegations all under one roof trying to, figure out a way to de-escalate the situation in Ukraine.
Yeah. It's really interesting because what we're seeing here is not just, some preliminary discussions or, just testing the waters.
Right.
These delegations, they've got the green light from their presidents,
Yeah.
to actually really dig into the specifics and
Yeah.
try to, hammer out some kind of common ground.
So it sounds like they're really serious about trying to make something happen this time.
It seems that way. Yeah.
So yesterday was mostly focused on talks between the U.S. and Ukraine, and afterwards, President Zelensky really pushed for more global pressure on Russia.
Hmm.
He even said, and this is a quote, "There must be more pressure on Russia to stop this terror, and that depends on all our partners, the U.S., Europe, and others around the world." And he also said that he believes that Russia is the only one dragging this war out.
Yeah. I mean, that right there just shows you the huge difference in perspective.
Yeah.
Ukraine's saying, hey, this is all on Russia. This war is continuing because of them.
Right.
But today, the focus is shifting to direct talks between the U.S. and Russia.
Okay.
And from what we're hearing, the Black Sea is front and center in those discussions.
So the U.S. is pushing for a ceasefire in the Black Sea, right? No attacks on ships or ports.
Exactly. They want to make sure that maritime traffic can move safely.
Which reminds me of that Black Sea Grain Initiative from 2022. That was all about letting food shipments get through, wasn't it?
Yeah, it was a crucial agreement designed to allow the shipment of food grains from both Ukraine and Russia, actually.
Right.
And, it actually worked for almost a year.
Which is pretty amazing considering.
Considering the circumstances.
Yeah.
Like a year of relative stability in that area, that was a big deal.
Yeah, it was. But then, of course, Russia pulled out of the deal in
Hmm.
2023. And that caused a lot of problems, especially with global food prices.
Oh, absolutely. It had a huge ripple effect.
So now it seems President Trump wants to try and get a similar agreement back in place.
He does. And interestingly enough, Moscow seems open to the idea.
Really?
But they've got a big condition,
Okay, what's that?
They're saying that the previous deal's obligations towards Russia weren't met.
Hmm.
They've even said this is their first item on the agenda.
So basically they're saying, we'll talk, but only if you address our concerns from the last time around.
Exactly. They want to make sure they're not getting the short end of the stick again.
Makes sense. So the Black Sea is a major point of discussion. What else are they tackling in these Riyadh talks?
Well, the other big issue is establishing a line of control. Figuring out where to actually freeze the front line.
Oh, wow. So where do you even begin with that?
Right. It's incredibly complicated. I mean,
Yeah.
they've got to figure out where the line should be drawn, who's going to monitor it, how they're going to make sure neither side crosses it,
Yeah.
all those really tricky questions about peacekeeping and security guarantees.
Yeah, it sounds like a logistical nightmare.
It is, and you can see this reflected in how both sides are talking about the talks.
How so?
Well, the Americans seem to be pretty optimistic,
Ah.
They're talking about making real progress.
Okay.
But the Kremlin, on the other hand, they're being a lot more cautious.
Really?
They're saying they're expecting difficult negotiations ahead, so,
Right. So the Americans are like, yeah, we got this. And the Russians are like, hold on a minute.
pretty much.
Okay, well, let's talk about Trump's special envoy, Steve Witkoff.
Okay,
He's leading this whole peace effort, and, he's also a close friend of Trump's.
right. His golf buddy.
So what's his approach here? What's the strategy?
Well, Witkoff recently gave us a little peek into Trump's game plan.
I'm listening.
The first step is a 30-day ceasefire.
Okay.
Just a temporary pause to the fighting.
Mm-hmm.
And during that time, they want to start negotiating a more permanent deal.
So the ceasefire is like a breathing space.
Exactly. A chance to step back from the brink and try to find a real solution.
And Witkoff seems to think this is achievable.
Yeah, he said the ultimate goal is a 30-day ceasefire, during which time we discuss a permanent ceasefire. We're not far away from that.
I don't know. I mean, 30 days, that doesn't seem like a lot of time to solve such a complex conflict.
Yeah, and you've got to remember, we've seen ceasefires fall apart before.
Oh, yeah, lots of times.
Like just recently, there was that agreement between Russia and Ukraine to not attack each other's energy infrastructure.
Right.
And that didn't last very long at all.
What happened?
Well, Ukraine ended up hitting Russian energy facilities.
They did.
And their justification was that there was no official signed truce document.
So basically they were saying it wasn't a real agreement.
Right, which is a bit of a worrying sign. you know.
Yeah, it doesn't exactly inspire confidence.
And then on top of that, you've got Russia escalating things.
Right, with that massive drone attack on Kyiv just a few days ago.
Exactly. I mean, at least 3 people were killed in that attack.
Mm.
It's just a tragic reminder of how much suffering is still going on.
The report even says this suffering certainly needs to end, and Trump is right to push for peace. But, actually getting to that peace, it just seems so difficult.
Yeah, I mean, finding a path to peace is one thing, but actually making it stick, that's the real challenge.
It is, and then you've got these interesting little details that Witkoff shared about the relationship between Trump and Putin.
Oh, yeah. Those are fascinating, weren't they?
Yeah, like that whole thing with the portrait.
Oh, right, the portrait.
Putin apparently commissioned this beautiful portrait of Trump from a top Russian artist.
And he gave it to Witkoff to personally deliver to Trump.
Which he did.
Such a strange little detail in the middle of all this, you know?
Yeah, it is. I mean, you've got this huge international crisis, and then you've got these two leaders exchanging personalized gifts.
It's almost like something out of a spy novel.
It is. And then there's that even weirder story about Putin's reaction when Trump was shot.
Right.
Witkoff said that Putin went to his local church and prayed for Trump's recovery.
With his priest.
Yeah. And Witkoff was very clear that this was purely because of their personal friendship.
Not because of Trump's political position.
Right. Which is just mind-blowing to me.
It is. I mean, it suggests a level of personal connection that you don't usually see in international diplomacy.
No, you don't. And it makes you wonder how much that personal relationship is influencing these peace talks.
Absolutely. It's a huge wild card in all of this.
And then there's the question of trust.
Right.
Witkoff said that the American side has a lot of trust in Russia.
And that they believe Putin genuinely wants peace.
Okay, but then he also said they don't have much trust in Ukraine.
Right. And he even mentioned that there was some kind of clash in the Oval Office last month.
So basically, they're going into these talks with very different levels of trust for each side.
Yeah, and that raises some serious concerns about whether the U.S. can actually be an effective mediator.
Exactly. The report even asks, with such prejudice, can the U.S. be an effective mediator?
It's a valid question. I mean, if you're seen as favoring one side over the other,
Right.
how can you be a neutral arbiter?
Yeah, it's a tough spot to be in, but then again, the report also points out that the U.S. is the only Western country that's actually talking peace right now.
That's true. They're the only ones at the table, so to speak.
So maybe they're the best hope we've got, even if it's a bit of a long shot.
Maybe. And it's important to note that the Vantage segment we're getting all this from also touched on some other geopolitical issues.
Oh, right. Like what?
Well, they mentioned things like India, Kashmir, potential foreign interference in Syria.
Okay.
And they even brought up Prime Minister Modi's focus on South cooperation.
Right. So there's a lot going on in the world right now.
Yeah, this is just one piece of a much larger puzzle.
But for today, we're focusing specifically on these Riyadh talks.
Right, these discussions about the Black Sea and the line of control.
Okay, so to sum up, what are the main takeaways from these talks so far?
Well, it looks like the biggest focus is on getting that maritime ceasefire in the Black Sea up and running again. They want to ensure the safe passage of ships and prevent any more attacks.
Okay.
And then the other big thing is trying to establish a line of control on the ground in Ukraine. But that's going to be a lot harder to achieve.
Yeah, much more complicated.
And we're also seeing a pretty big difference in expectations between the U.S. and Russia.
Right.
The U.S. seems to be feeling pretty good about the potential for progress, but Russia's being a lot more cautious.
And then you've got Trump's special envoy Witkoff in the mix.
Right.
And his personal relationship with Putin seems to be adding a whole other layer of complexity to these negotiations.
And on top of all that, you've got the issue of trust, or rather, the lack of trust.
Right.
The U.S. says they trust Russia, but they don't seem to have the same level of trust in Ukraine.
Yeah, which raises questions about whether they can actually be an effective mediator in this whole thing.
It does, but at the end of the day, they're the only ones really pushing for peace right now.
So it's a very delicate situation, lots of moving parts. And it'll be interesting to see how things develop in the coming days and weeks.
Absolutely.
So for all of you listening out there, what do you think is the most important factor in achieving a lasting resolution to this conflict?
Yeah, what needs to happen for peace to actually have a chance?
I mean, you've got all these broken agreements and this history of mistrust.
Right.
So what's the key ingredient that's been missing?
It's a tough question, but it's one we all need to be thinking about.
Because the stakes are incredibly high.
They are the future of Ukraine and potentially the stability of the entire region hangs in the balance.
So, yeah, let us know your thoughts on this because it's a conversation that needs to be had.
Absolutely.